Dave, appreciate you jumping on. Pleasure meeting you. Pleasure being here with you. Thank you for being on this episode with us. And would you quickly, or not quickly, but would you mind just giving us a little history of yourself, who you are, what you do, and how you do it?
So I'm Dave Lakin. I'm the National Director for Veteran Employment at Still Serving Veterans, retired Navy Chief, joined in 1984, got out in 2008 after 24 years. I did everything from starting out as an aircraft electrician, ended up as a program manager at NAVAIR headquarters, so many things in between. I ran volunteer programs and I was new construction on the George Washington and ran mentorship programs. And I always took the opportunity in the Navy to diversify myself and take on any new tasking that was available. So, I don't know anybody who made as much out of their Navy career as I did, just because every opportunity that came along. I'm firefighting school several times and all good stuff. Since I got out of the Navy in 2008, I went and joined industry and I'm a PMP, so I was a professional program manager in the billion-dollar tech company for 6 years, and then uh, got burned out with that a little bit, and went into uh, executive coaching and business coaching and did that for 11 years. COVID came along, kind of crushed my business, a very face-to-face business like that, where you get all your customers from being in rooms full of people. There weren't any rooms full of people. Uh, my business kind of flopped, and then ran across Still Serving Veterans in the town where I live, Huntsville, Alabama, and it's a great organization. And they happened to have an open manager position, offered me that, and became manager over 3 people, and now I'm manager over 15, 16 people, and turned it from 3 people in this office to expanded the program out to 2 offices plus 4 satellite remote offices. Super blessed to be here. I love this organization and everything about it. We have an incredible mission serving veterans.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Sounds like you've done a lot of different things in in different fields and multiple spectrums across, and now helping veterans. That's amazing. What do you see in the shift of or in today's world of veterans? Getting out. It's over. I think the statistic is about 200,000 veterans a year enter the workforce. What do you see in that? Do you see a lot of veterans that are program ready to get back into civilian world, or is a combination of all different aspects and things like that?
It's a great question, particularly in today's environment. 2008, if we back up 2005, when I first got to NavAir, I had developed a reputation as kind of a programmatic fixer. And I had a lot of experience with manpower management. We don't even think about that in the military, manpower management. I don't know what the reports are called in the other services, but in the Navy, it was called the EDVR, Listed Distribution Verification Report. And so a list of all the billets at the command. And I had, done a lot of work to not only get those billets filled at previous commands, the 2 previous commands in particular, but making sure they were filled with the right people and the right training and stuff. When I got to NavAir, it was a staff command, and they were 60% manned, which, at that time we were going through uh, we were plussing up people and pulling people from desks all over the military and sending them to Iraq to go do crazy non-job related duties. And so the staff commands really took a beating on that. The deployable commands were relatively untouched, but staff commands got decimated. And so the one I was at, like I said, was 60% manned, and that cost a ton of money. So the military members who were there, we liaised between the sponsor program managers and the active duty commands, boots on the ground folks. And failing, when those billets are open, you didn't have a face-to-face turnover, so a lot of programs stagnated. And so it was important to fill those billets with people with the right skills for the job, according to our NECs, MOSs. And so I had, within about a little over a year, I'd gotten them up to 110% manned. And that was a big deal. And that was, in large part by being the command career counselor at that UIC, that particular unit. Outside the military, back inside the unit in the military, we pay a lot of attention to NECs and MOSs and making sure that people are in the right spot for their skill sets and for the needs of the command and stuff. But we don't think about how those things fold over to the civilian world, right? So, for instance, a Navy corpsman, doesn't matter if they had 10 years in the Navy as a corpsman doing emergency room kind of procedures and they may assist in surgery. They do help with physicals. They do all kinds of under supervision, of course, but sometimes they get to do like minor procedures, which is crazy in civilian world. And when they come out, they can't even be an EMT because their jobs in uniform don't directly fall to their jobs out of uniform. I was an aircraft electrician, but in order to come out and do my job at an airfield, I need an FAA certification. For somebody who replaces jet engines on F-18s, they can't come out and do that in the civilian world without an A&P license. And so the military, we don't get all those certifications and licensing. They may concentrate on, well, if you have to have a bachelor's degree now to be at E7 or above, but they don't force it to be a concentration that's going to serve them when they get out of the service. So, with our current climate being what it is, which seems to some people to be kind of anti-veteran, right? We're canceled 80,000 jobs, what they're talking about in the VA, and federal jobs in general are largely filled by veterans, and we're downsizing, or however you want to call it, for the federal government, and that's impacting a lot of veterans. So maybe 20% of that federal workforce is veterans. So the competition is extremely high. So you take people who already are having a hard time translating their in uniform skills, which are high skills, into their civilian counterpart positions, which the federal government has a better understanding of and can hire you into. But the civilian workforce just doesn't understand what we do and have that flexibility to say, sure, an aviation electrician can come and repair avionics systems on a Cessna or whatever. It's a difficult environment already, and then you compound it with circumstances we're dealing with today, and it can make it even more difficult. It's tough getting out right now.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is tough. The market is definitely tough. What do you think we can do, or does your organization help in some of those certifications? For those that are transferring from the military and then going into the aviation field, for instance, are there certifications that your organization can help them achieve and get so that they can get those jobs, or is it something they have to do on their own or through the VA, through the GI Bill, and things like that?
So we've been doing this since 2006, and if you look at Burger King, McDonald's, and those kinds of folks, you see that nobody can be everything to the market. And so rather than trying to be the answer for everything, we have surrounded ourselves with great people. Every captain of industry that you talk to and say, Mr. Gates, what has the secret been to your success from, working in a garage to being who you are today? And they'll always say, I surrounded myself with good people. And so that's what we've done. We have surrounded ourselves with great partners. And so we're partnered with Onward to Opportunity from Syracuse University and Hiring Our Heroes and the USO and Department of Labor. And through those connections, combined arms, through those connections, we're able to connect people to those certification kind of programs and with skill bridge kind of programs to help bridge that gap between what they come out of the service with and what's really going to get them a job for the long term. We concentrate on all those job searching skills. We make sure that they have a great resume to translate all those military skills and experience to something that recruiters understand. We make sure that their LinkedIn is doing a great job for them to help build their job search network when even if they're not spending a lot of time, it makes them very, very findable for recruiters. Or we teach them how to do good interview skills and how to do job fairs and how to um, do salary negotiation and all those things. And of course, every one of our counselors is a veteran. We end up making relationships with a lot of these folks and
Right.
and are able to stay with them long term And that maybe the best part of the job for us is great getting to develop those relationships and stay with people over time. To hear that they don't stay, folks don't stay in the first job they have out of the service. Often they change jobs maybe within a year, 18 months, or twice they may. And they come back to us and say, man, that first one was not at all what I expected civilian life to be. Let's take another run at it. And we'll say, sure, I know you, you know me. We'll update your resume and get back on it.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest gaps you see when it comes to the resume side of ensuring that you are able to expand on your military experience, but also make it relatable for that recruiter on the other end that might not understand the things that you have done? What are some of the biggest words of advice you have there?
Sure. So people have the hardest time relating what they did in uniform, not just, like again, I was an aviation electrician. I could say, I did battery management systems, I did power generating, regulating, I did aircraft corrosion, I did, lighting systems and things like that. But the civilian world wants to know at what level an operator you were, right? So I came out as a 24-year Navy chief, and I had at times, depending on what duty we're talking about, I may have had hundreds of people under me and managing tons of inventory and tons of test equipment and millions of dollars of stuff and responsible for all these people, their professional development and their care, literally care and feeding, things like that. And you got to be able to express that on your resume, one page, 2 pages, so that the people who you're proposing should hire you can say, wow, this is not somebody who just needs to be in charge of 6 or 7 people. This is somebody who has years of experience governing the success of maybe hundreds of people in some cases. And so people overestimate or underestimate. They just do a bad job at it, relating their worth and their value. And to be honest, most of the time we undershoot. They just don't understand. They think, and I'm just going to work doing the best job I can every day. And they, we from having been on the inside, we know that, we're all full of machismo and bravado and all that stuff. And we talk a lot of, locker room talk. But when they get out there and they're sitting across the table from 4 executives that are talking about hiring them for 6 figures when they've never seen 6 figures before, and they clam up, you know, they don't know how to answer a question. They don't know how to be bold and upfront and say, this is what I did. This is what I want. This is what I bring to the table. They just say, I just did the best job I could every day. And so that's part of why they have such a hard time getting a job. So the gap is getting them to know their worth for sure. And we spend real time on doing that so that, we answer the question in our first meeting with them, usually first or second meeting. This is what, when that first recruiter calls you and says, hey man, I loved your resume, I loved your application, I'd really love to get you in here Tuesday for an interview. They will say, one of the things I got to know, what are you thinking about for compensation on this job? And that your answer tells them, are you in ballpark? Do you really know what you're talking about? Are you really a player here? Or are you so far out of our spectrum? We're thinking 90,000, you're thinking 50,000, or you're thinking 130,000. If you're so far off of the mark, you're not the right guy. You got to know your worth to yourself and to the company that you're going to. So the biggest gap is there is understanding where you're going to fit in the food chain, and it's got to be pretty accurate, plus or minus maybe most 10K.
I definitely can contest to the intimidation factor of sitting in front of, executives in an interview because to you, like, or to me anyway, they were just so knowledgeable, so professional, just had to have been amazing. They probably all have doctorates. They're probably just these bigger than thou people. And then once you start to get to know them, you're like, I can play ball with these guys. We had different paths, but my leadership experience and everything that the military threw at me over the 24 years, I can sit in a room and talk, very well with these people and actually make some points and bring up things they haven't thought about and actually be a contributor to the team. I know those first couple months at a new job, I just sat in a corner, like scared to talk because I didn't think I brought anything to the table compared to everybody else. Everyone just seemed so much smarter than me.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely
It,
there's
it,
definitely an intimidation level there.
so that the real term for it is imposter syndrome.
Right.
And And I felt that 100%. I came out with no degree, no certifications, didn't have my PMP. And every day I'm like, fake it till you make it, fake it till you make it. When my leadership skills, my problem solving, my perseverance, my getting to work on time, my work ethic crushed those people. And actually to be successful, you had to dial that stuff back so you weren't so disruptive and intimidating in a work environment. And that's not to toot my own horn or pull my own strings. That's a fact. A lot of people get to dial back all those years of leadership and get it done, just so that they can fit in an environment without um, setting everybody else on their heels, wondering, who's this guy? He's going to make us all look bad. And so long as the skills that you are hired to do, if you can trust that chain of command to have made a great decision in hiring you for those hard skills, your soft skills are going to beat them every day.
So curious, because along those lines, I'd always heard a rumor that sometimes if you interview too well, or if your resume is too sharp, or if you look too kind of on top of the game, a hiring manager may back off you because they're worried about like job security at that point.
I had a Marine Corps major 30 years, and he was having the hardest time. He'd been to a bunch of interviews. So, if your resume works, you're getting interviews. If you're putting in applications and not getting interviews, something's wrong with your resume. But if you're getting interviews but not getting job offers, then you're blowing it in the interview. So I said, all right, let's sit back and talk about the last several interviews. What are the typical questions and what are your typical answers? And whenever he got around to the point in the interview where they said, all right, well, do you have any questions for us? He'd start troubleshooting. What can you tell me about the amount of churn that you've had in your organization? What do you feel it is that people don't like about your organization that's causing them to leave? What is it about your leadership that's failing people from staying and from developing professionally? You can't ask those questions because the guy who's failing on that is in the interview.
Right.
That's going to be your hiring manager, is the guy who failed on all those points. If you go in the interview, you start asking questions like that, you're done, because you just threatened him and his job, and he's not having it.
He's not having it. Yeah. Earlier you were talking about being able to express, your leadership capabilities. And I find that I want to say in the last handful of resumes that I've been working on or have rewritten from veterans, a lot of them tend to believe that their rank will secure their leadership or let the recruiter know how much leadership they have or, how many people they led and things like that. And I always have to bring it back and say, your rank, they don't understand what your rank is. We have to put in there how many people you led, how you led them, and what was the success rate of your leadership for your troop, your soldiers, your airmen, your Marines, whatever the case may be, and dialing that in, because your rank for that recruiter, it doesn't mean anything to them. They don't understand it. They don't know what it means. And they're like, man, I thought that they would understand that I led people because of my rank, because I was a sergeant or because I put sergeant or staff sergeant or any of those things. And it's like, it's a misconception that a lot of veterans have. They think that their rank is going to take them to the next level. But in the civilian world, you have to be able to relay what it is that you were able to do, what you did, and how well you did it, and not rely on titles so much, and even break it down.
Yeah.
There was a resume that we were working through a week ago I brought it up on one of our podcasts because it was a gentleman it was a veteran that was trying to get into the HR field, and he was putting all these things on there like did X amount of urinalysis, and did this many award writing things and all this stuff. And I'm like, those are things that don't matter. You have to dial it into a onboarding compliance. How does it relate to the civilian world? Your attention to detail. How does it relate to the civilian world? And understanding, what is the job description saying? What is the job description saying? And then taking those things, those bullet points, and then matching the job description based off of what you've done and making your resume stand out that way versus I did, these things that are very vague and don't make sense in the civilian world. Because, at the end of the day, I was telling the guys that, you might have done X amount of your analysis, and you did them and you completed them to at 100%, but we don't do that in the civilian world. We hire a third party that does all your background checks and your drug testing and all that stuff. And it goes through them and you never touch it. You never see it. So you get a yes or no at the end of the day on the civilian side. So, understanding what those different things are and then adapting your resume to make it make sense for that job that you're seeking.
100%. People said the hardest time with that, articulating exactly what they did. You got to think of what did I do, and and what do they do in the civilian world that relates to that, so that I can make that crossover for them. And it's hard. Hopefully, one of the programs that we're developing in SSV this year is educating employers and HRs and managers to be able to recruit and hire and onboard and integrate veterans into their work environment, because for all of those reasons, you got to train recruiters and train hiring managers in the interview to ask those deepening questions, so you can dig down to the reality of what they did in uniform. You can't just stop at the first question you always ask. You get to say, all right, well, tell me about that. What does that mean to you? How many people did that involve? How many years did you do that? What was the impact to the quality of life for the individual? What was the impact to the command for that kind of stuff? You got to ask those deepening questions in order to really get to what this person is bringing to the table. Failing that, you're going to interview a lot of people and waste a lot of time when they might have been amazing in your environment. You just didn't ask the right questions. They'll tell you the answers, but you got to ask the questions. They don't know what to tell you because they don't know your world yet.
Right, right. And to your point though, there's also in a lot of instances there's a lack of training and education around interview processes for hiring managers in general. They don't typically know how to ask questions or look at your resume and ask questions based off of your resume. They might have a set of questions that somebody gave them to ask, and then they ask that, but they never peel the onion back. And some use the STAR method, some, other use different methods, from an interview standpoint that have had some training around it. But a lot of times what I found in my 12 years in the industry is that I'm having to coach hiring managers on how to interview and have those deep conversations and peel the onion back.
I forget what's that rule, that Peter's rule or something like that. A person will ascend to the level of their incompetence, right? uh, you know, start out as a worker bee and work your way up, and next thing you know, you're a manager, and they say, all right, you got to interview a bunch of people to fill that opening you have in your area, and you're like, all right, I guess now I'm an interviewer,
Right.
and you just kind of show up, and the HR maybe hands you several questions that they always ask in all the interviews, and you do the best you can, but you're absolutely right. No training. They don't know what to expect. What's a good answer? What's a bad answer? They're just going on feel and winging it.
That happened to me my current job, second day there, still trying to figure everything out. My manager handed me a resume and said, he's coming in tomorrow. You got the ball. If you like him, hire him. I'm like, I don't even know the culture of this shop yet. I don't even know if he will fit in with this culture that we have here. I don't know what to ask. Like, are you serious? You want me to do it? And he's like, yeah, I trust you. And just walked out the room.
He sounds credible and he's likable. Then that's all you have to go on at that point, right?
Dave, earlier you mentioned that you have a lot of folks that come out, you guys help them get into that first job and transition. And then a year, 18 months later, they come back and that wasn't the job for them. How often do you see veterans that you guys help come to you guys and you help them get into a field that's relatable to the field that they were previously in the military, and then a year and a half later come back and decide that that's not the field that they want to be in at all in the civilian world?
Happens more often than we like, but the reality is that they gotta pay a mortgage bill, they gotta pay a car payment, they get credit cards, kids want gifts for Christmas and stuff. So at that point, you got to take the job that's going to earn you the most income, whether you love the job or not, because you got bills to pay and a family to support, and that's the reality. Fortunately, a lot of the times, the ability to flip careers is a luxury. So if you're dealing with somebody who has the ability to do that, they just wrapped up their degree and now they want to go get a job with their degree. Well, that's great, but you're going to give up X number of years in uniform of experience doing this thing that you gained an amount of competency at, and you're going to give up all that experience so you can start at ground level in this new thing that you just got a degree at. So your competition is every other 22-year-old that just finished their degree too. And if you're not as spry and as sharp and as ready to go on the ball, as ambitious and excited about your new career as they are, then they're going to beat you in the interview because they get paid less to do the same job you're going to do.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. It's a very valid point, and I see it a lot too. And even in my own personal life, there's been times where I wanted to make a career change, but then I look at compensation and say, man, I can't afford to make a career change. So I've got to stay where I'm at, you know? It's just
Yeah,
a
best
hard
case
reality.
scenario, I encourage everybody to stay in the career that they've got the most competency in because that's what they can put on their resume and pull the most dollars for. But some people just hate their job. They go back to the Navy corpsman, they come out and they're like, I never want to do that again. All right, cool. So what are we going to do to start all the way over from ground zero? What are we going to do?
Well, and I think too, there's also those that fall into different skill sets that, you know, they're in the civilian world, they're very limited in what they can do in the civilian world. And then finding those jobs is also a tough place to be. Or even, you know, a lot of times I talk to guys that, you know, infantry guys or combat arms guys that, you know, they don't want to be a firefighter. They don't want to be an EMT. They don't want to be a police officer. They don't want to go into that field. And then it's definitely for them really starting from the ground up. And that can be tough.
Yep. Well, the good thing is, we've got Montgomery GI Bill for life now, right? So they can retrain. While they're going through that, they get the E5 housing allowance, which is like I want to say $2,500, give or take, per month to cover. So school is covered, and they get some amount of housing allowance coming. There's been times in my life where I worked 2 jobs, 3 jobs sometimes, and people just don't do that anymore. How many people do you know that are working 2 jobs, never mind 3 jobs? When I was in E5, of course, I was full-time Navy E5 attached to a ship, and I had a job driving Pizza Hut. So, which, every night I was out there driving pizza to make ends meet, living in the barracks, attached to the ship, and sending money home to my soon-to-be ex-wife and son. And so you do back then, you do what you had to do to make ends meet. And it's tough having that conversation with people today saying, look, you want to go to school and retrain and become something else, that's great. But you might have to work a job or two to make all the ends meet until you're ready to get out there 4 years from now and start in that new career field.
It's a hard reality, but sometimes you have to have those tough conversations.
But
Letting them
we are the guys to do it, and
right.
not just guys. We military members, veterans hitting the workforce these days, going back to perseverance, problem solving. We are absolutely the people to do it. It's just another mission, and I don't care where you were in the military. If you are a career recruiter, all the way out to infantry out on the front lines in Fallujah, you know that for the moment, I got to do whatever needs to be done to get the job done. I'll breathe when I have a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. I share my story all the time because that was really my hard reality when I got out of the service. You know, I spent 6 months looking for work in the civilian world, and I thought for sure, like, you know, as a staff sergeant getting out of the army, that I would definitely get picked up. And I had went through different corporate, you know, military programs, Lowe's, Walmart, you know, and applying for these jobs to go into leadership, and I just wasn't getting any bites. And I finally got to a point where I was like, I'm gonna work at Toyota. And then that's how I found the staffing and recruiting world, where I spent my last 2 years in the army recruiting. And I said, man, I can do this all day. And that opened up so many doors for me and so many opportunities. And that's how I ended up in the recruiting world in the corporate side. And I've done everything from recruiting and leading global teams of talent acquisitions and now director of HR. But it was a hard reality when they offered me a job and they said, you're going to make $12.50 an hour starting. I said, this is in 2014. I was like, I'm not going to survive. But, you know, I figured if I worked hard enough and, you know, I could work my way up, and that's what we do, you know. And a lot of times you just have to have those hard conversations with veterans coming out, or, you know, like, it's going to take some time, but your work ethic is greater than anybody else's. You know what the mission is. You can get it done. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
And if you can get into a great organization that has an open mind and a willingness to let you kind of run with your skills. I know a command sergeant major, intel kind of guy, special forces guy, who, he's not the Hulk or anything. He's just an average Joe. It just happens to be that he was in that kind of community. But you wouldn't know that just from talking to him. He wasn't, super out front alpha kind of guy. And he got hired at a company here in town that didn't have a veterans affinity program. So he got hired to do this one thing, and he got in there and said, hey, one of the things I think I have time to do here that I would love to do is create a community of your veterans who are already in your company and to help them support each other and find resources and things like that. for the company standpoint, it'll create an environment where they have a tribe again. They have folks that they can rely on with common backgrounds and common experiences. And it will, at the end of the day, they will stay longer because your company has this thing. And it'll be easier to recruit people to the company because your company has this thing. And so he created this cell inside the company that was the veterans community, and their recruiting team was able to use that as a springboard to bring more veterans. And great company, and he's got this great program in there. But the point is, he went in and created a role that didn't exist because he was a problem solver, think out of the box kind of guy. What can I do for this environment, this company, where I can bring my skills and apply them to the best use in this company? Everybody wins all the way around, and it's an amazing program for his company. So, we can go find those opportunities. You don't have to be hired to be the leader. That doesn't mean you can't be a leader.
Right. And not be afraid to be bold in some instances, right? That's how we were trained. That's how we were brought up in the military, is be bold. Sometimes we have to do that and put our foot forward and take those I don't want to say risk, but take those things to the shop and say, hey, we can do better. We can do something here and be different from everybody else. We need more of it.
Absolutely.
Dave, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. It's been a pleasure meeting you, pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for all you do. Where can our listeners find you? I know you're on all over LinkedIn, but if they wanted to connect, LinkedIn and other socials, or
they can connect with me on LinkedIn for sure. That's probably my biggest platform. I get 10,000 plus or so connections there. Send me a message. If you look at my contact information on LinkedIn, it's got it all out there. I've been on LinkedIn since there's been a LinkedIn. So my phone number's out there, my email address, everything. So that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. If anything that we talked about today resonates with you and you want to have a conversation about it, I love talking shop. I love talking military. I love talking veteran issues. So reach out to me for sure. For what we do from a still serving veteran standpoint, go to ssv.org, sierra-victor.org, and look us up on career services. And I'm happy that every one of our counselors is a veteran, just like me, only not as good looking. And I'm happy to get some information from you, connect you with a counselor, and whatever help you need in your job search, we're happy to do it and stick with you until you're in the job you want to be in.
I do gotta say, one of my buddies is going through the retirement process. He's about 6 months out. And from our conversation the other day, I steered him right towards your organization, and he has been blown away with the amount of service, the help he's getting. He's really, really excited because he's getting ready to start applying for his skill bridge. And I'm like, dude, you got to have the best resume possible out there. And I know the people that can help you do it. And he has been singing your praises, your organization's praises, since he started working with y'all. So there's proof that it works, and you guys are doing great work.
Good deal. I love to hear that stuff.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you, Dave. You have a great rest of your day, and hope to talk to you soon.
Absolutely. I'll come back anytime. I love talking shop, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Take care.